Hello everybody and welcome to Flock Talk. Today I'm going to be going over how you can teach your bird to forage independently if they were never taught how to.
Nicer.
Foraging is basically teaching your bird how to search and find their food on their own instead of eating it just out of a bowl. And while this comes naturally to a lot of parrots, for a lot of captive birds, they weren't taught how to do this appropriately when they were raised, so they may not know how to do it and need a little bit of help. Foraging is a great activity for your bird. It provides a lot of enrichment. It can slow down their eating, which can prevent them from overeating their food and putting on weight. It can also prevent plucking behaviors because it gives them something enriching and fun to do with their time. The first thing we need to consider is what our bird is going to be foraging with. We want to select a variety of toy parts that the bird is going to be able to solve extremely easily. And the best way to set this up is to pick any foragers that you can have that the bird can easily see the food and be able to eat it without really having to put too much work in right out the gate. Some examples of that might be a vine ball that you can just tuck some millet underneath so it's easily accessible and visible. You could use finger traps and just leave things on the edges of the tube so it's really easy to see and eat from. I also have these little solo wood pouches that are a little bit more difficult because they can be harder to see the food. But if you position your treat just right, it can still be quite visible from the edge, and then the wood is super, super soft, so it starts to encourage them to chew through it and begin to really learn the act of foraging. So I really love using these pouches for that. There are a ton of other options that you could use as well. Take a look at the other toys that you have laying around your bird's room or in their cage, and I guarantee you can find a variety of ways to tuck a bunch of different treats in there and just repurpose what you already have. So what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to stuff treats into them that I know my bird really, really likes. And in this case, I'm going to use millet because it's one of the easiest ones to work with. It is a nice large bundle, so as soon as the bird comes over and explores it, they can pull it out and get a very large lump sum of treats, and that's going to really motivate them to come back and look again. If I did just single seeds, it would be really easy for those seeds to fall out and for them to not notice, or it could make it a little bit more difficult for them to access a single seed. It could make it less valuable because it's just one thing. I want them to get a huge jackpot just about every single time that they interact with these little toy parts and really be motivated to continue to search to get that valuable reward again. So I do recommend selecting toy parts that your bird has already seen, because then they're already going to be comfortable with it. If you use brand new toy pieces, it's very likely that your bird's going to be pretty scared of it no matter how much millet you stick around it. So I do like to pick toy parts that are already a part of the bird's existing toys, or you could even do this right out the gate with the toys in their room. I'm just choosing to do this more individually because Toto is a little bit sensitive to hands being in and around his enclosure, so I just want to do this outside of his space for now to introduce the concept while we work on those other problems. But otherwise, you could easily start this process with the toys that are already inside your bird's enclosure if that works best for you. So I'm just going to lay these toy parts out on the table and just let him investigate. In those white dishes is some pellets that he's happily munching away at, but there's seeds inside these delicious treats that are scattered all over the table and are easily visible for him. So I'm just going to leave them there for him to kind of evaluate and see how he feels about it. And he does eventually decide to go and check it out and peck some of the seeds that are laying around them and just kind of start to form the concept that there are good treats hanging around where these toy parts are. He doesn't necessarily have to interact with them directly in order to see that there is value near them. And we start to see very quickly that after he's eaten all the little seed bits all around the base of the toy parts here, he starts to peck at the toy parts themselves and realize, hey, there might be some bits in here, there might be some food. And during the initial part here, he's a little bit scared of the things, so it takes him a little bit to feel comfortable interacting with them, and that's okay. We're in no hurry here. Whatever he's comfortable doing is what we're going to do that day. So once he was a little bit more comfortable with the toy parts, I'm going to begin helping him out a little bit. So I'm going to hold the toy parts for him, I'm going to show him where the seeds are, and just really try and make it obvious for him. I don't want to make things too difficult because then it's frustrating for the bird and it'll discourage them from wanting to look for the seeds, whereas if I can make it really easy and really obvious, then it's an easy success and it's a fun, enjoyable experience for them with no stress and no frustration. And I'm basically just going to let him enjoy these as is. I'm going to let the bird explore them, I'm going to let them get the treats that are super easy and accessible. Although this doesn't seem like it's very much like foraging, the bird isn't really having to work per se in order to get the food, they are still learning that the food is in these locations now. For a lot of birds, they only ever get fed out of food bowls, and they've never been able to connect the idea that food could be available in a different spot. So by making it really simple like this, the bird is already trying to establish the fact that food exists in these other spaces, that these toy parts and these objects can also hold snacks and goodies. And making that bridged gap is really, really critical before we can even go anywhere near making foraging more complicated. So this entire part here is just about teaching them that these objects can hold food, and there are variable things to explore in order to find that food. And we begin to see Toto make that connection and really show more interest in engaging with these objects. He starts picking them up. This Sola pouch he begins ripping open when he realizes there's food in it. And you really see him begin to realize that, hey, this object holds food. I would like to get the food out of it. He does still have pellets easily available in those white dishes behind him, so if he gets frustrated or doesn't want to participate in this activity, he can easily leave. This isn't his only food source. This is just a fun additional activity for him to be encouraged to explore. If he gets overwhelmed and doesn't want to participate, there's no pressure on him to do so because his other food is so easily accessible. And we will see him leave and go back to those dishes every now and then when he either feels like he's eaten everything or he's decided that that activity is a little too overwhelming for him and he just needs a bit of a break. So it's really easy for him to back out of the situation and not feel like the only way to access food is by doing something that he's unfamiliar and potentially a little bit stressed out by. What we're going to see happen is Toto's going to go to those food dishes less and less and less every single day that we practice this, and there's a few different reasons for that. The first one is obviously that these are filled with millet, and those dishes don't have millet in them. He doesn't really get millet for any other activity except for this, so it makes the millet a little bit more special. But the other reason for that is a phenomenon known as contra-freeloading, and that basically just means that the food that gets worked for and the activities that you participate in are more valuable and more reinforcing than the stuff that's just handed out for free. So although the food in the bowl is still there and it's still tasty, it's not as reinforcing, it's not as enjoyable, and they're less motivated to want to eat out of the plain bowl as they are out of the enriching activity, the foraging and the ripping through the toy. All of that provides extra stimulus and extra excitement and extra fun that encourages them to want to continue to do this activity, even if both of these things were filled with the exact same food. Despite the fact that the thing in the bowl is more easily accessible, it's not as fun, it's not as enjoyable, so they are less likely to want to actually eat the food out of those plain bowls as they are over foragers once they are confident and comfortable exhibiting that foraging behavior. So as we go through here, I will begin to introduce a couple different types of foragers, and basically what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at the toys that are in his room and what kind of toy parts they're made of, and then I'm introducing him to those individual elements out here. So he's got toys with vine balls on them, he's got toys with the finger traps, and he's got toys with this little wooden spiral on them. So I would like him to be quite familiar with the idea that these individual toy parts can have food in them, and it can be a lot less overwhelming that way. If I go straight into putting it on the toy, there's a lot of things to look at on a single toy. There's a lot of different colors, a lot of different toy parts, and it can be difficult for him to isolate where the food could be hidden. So by me breaking it up this way for him, it makes it a little bit easier for him to recognize the individual parts that can possibly hold food. So when we do eventually translate this over into his room, he'll be able to focus on where the food is most likely to be hidden, dig through that toy, and get to the spot where food might be. So each day that we do this, you'll see that I make the treats a little bit more hidden each time. And while I'm not trying to up the difficulty too much right now, I do want to encourage him to chew on the toys just a little bit more. So I'm still making sure there's a high rate of success here, that they're easy to access, but the treats aren't necessarily going to just fall out on their own anymore. I'm going to put them a little bit further in that finger trap. I'm going to close up the pouch a little bit more, and that vine ball is going to have more on the inside of it. Now that he is beginning to understand that these toy parts have food in them, and he's showing a lot of interest, where the second that I go and grab them, he's already flying down to the table, ready for the activity. He knows what's coming. That's how I know that he already understands that these things have food in them, whether or not he can actually see that food. He now has a strong understanding that that toy part means that food is nearby. So I don't need to necessarily have the food quite as visible as I did in the beginning, and I can begin to make it just slightly more concealed and make the activity a bit more engaging for him. So once he's giving me that response where he's able to acknowledge the toy and immediately know where to look, I'm going to shift things into the room. And there's a bunch of different ways you can transition to this. You can throw in a whole ton of treats with really high success, so no matter where they look, they're going to find something and just walk away. Or you can continue to help them. It just depends on the bird and how much assistance they need. Toto was actually pretty good, and basically as soon as I started hiding things, he sorted out pretty quickly how this whole concept was going to work and didn't need too much additional help. So I'm going to start prepping the toys that are going to be the main foraging toys to go into Toto's room. And my goal here is that I want him to be able to explore on his room, and anytime he has the thought to go and look, he will be successful and he will find something. So it doesn't matter to me if he gorges on millet all day for this particular day. All I want is that anytime he, on his own in his room when he's alone, has that thought to go and check on the toys, and if he just gives something a glance, he's going to succeed. I want there to be a 0% chance that he goes and looks for something and doesn't find something. And my reason for that is because I really want to encourage that foraging behavior. So if I only hide like 3 millet balls in here and he decides, hey, I'm going to go looking for food, and then he doesn't find anything, that's going to be super discouraging for him, and it's going to show him that searching for food doesn't have any results. And that's not what I want. I want him to have that moment of thought that he wants to go looking for a snack and immediately find a ton of different options no matter where he looks. So I want to be reinforcing that behavior so it'll encourage him to keep searching down the road. Right now that's going to mean a lot of millet. Down the road it's going to mean that we have a very resilient bird that has a lot of motivation to look for food. So when I set these toys up, I decide to take the opportunity to show Toto. So I will hide some treats while he's watching. I'll make sure he's really clearly understanding that food is in this room, in these toys. And I'm going to help him be able to sort it out. And we'll see him search around. We'll see him do a really good job of sorting out a ton of these foragers on his own. And every now and then, if I see him searching for just a little bit too long and I see him starting to want to kind of give up, that's when I'm going to pop in and I'm going to show him where the food is, give him an easy win, and help boost his confidence a little bit more in that regard. Again, we're trying to keep their success really high. If every time they search, they get frustrated and they fail, they're going to stop wanting to search. So I want to make sure that I'm giving him a lot of success. Making things more difficult and challenging can come down the line once we have a bird that's a lot more confident in their capacity to forage. Right now, we're just trying to create those connections that foraging is even an option. Even though foraging is an innate behavior and a parrot does forage naturally, it doesn't mean it's going to come super easily to them when they're raised in captivity and haven't been introduced to this concept before. So it can take a little bit of time for them to sort all of that out and how it all works, let alone having to search repeatedly with a bunch of the spots being empty. So that's all more complicated stuff that's going to come way later down the road. So just about every morning when I come in to feed Toto, I'm going to participate in this little bit of an activity for him. And it doesn't have to be long. It could be, a short little 2-minute burst where he just watches me fill the foragers and I walk away. And each day what we're going to start to see is he becomes a lot more resilient. He begins to search a lot more on his own and need less assistance from me. So on the first day he was getting kind of bored and he was giving up, and I had to bring my hand in to show him where the treats were. And now we're hitting a point where I can basically fill it and walk away. And that's where I know that we're pretty much done here. We have successfully taught him how to search and find his food. I will walk in, I will fill this forager, and then I'll just stand back and watch. I'm still wanting to make sure he's not getting frustrated, so I do stay there for the duration of time that he is foraging for, and that way I can pop in and help if he needs it, as I really do not want any frustration or stress to build during the process of him foraging. But otherwise, I'm just going to be able to sit back and watch, and he does an absolutely phenomenal job. And what I should draw attention to here is that toy is the exact same toy that was in the last clip. It's just that he has been foraging on this thing so much, even when I'm not in the room, that he's demolishing it. He actually broke the string in half and threw the thing on the floor to make all the food come out. And he's learning new strategies to be able to solve it, and that's why the toy ended up shrinking by half the size, was because he was just using it so much. And that is phenomenal. That's showing me that this bird is understanding that food is in here, and even when I am not around, he is still searching and actively enjoying this activity and finding food. And that's how we know that we have successfully taught this bird how to forage on their own. And this is where I'm going to leave it. This is how you would introduce a bird who has never foraged for anything in their life how to search and find their own food, so that way you can give them a lot more enrichment throughout the day. You can make things so much more complicated from here, and I definitely encourage you to do so. When you're wanting to build more resilience and you're wanting to build a bird that is able to search for their food and even fail time after time after time, but still keep searching, once you've hit a point where your bird is successfully foraging in their room, I'd say give it at least a week where they have been searching on their own, completely unassisted. That's when I would start to reduce the amount of food that's hidden, so that way now they're searching in a couple spots and there won't be things there, but they can move to another spot and all of a sudden there will be some. So now they know that they're quite successful and they have a strong reinforcement history with their activity. Then you can start to dull down the amount of treats that are there so they can fail and learn to overcome that. And they can learn to keep searching despite that failure, despite not finding anything. And you can gradually reduce the amount of treats week after week after week, and even begin introducing having some of their pellets and stuff in forages and really change it up. But that's all stuff that can happen over a lot longer of a period of time. For actually just teaching a bird the bare bones basis of foraging, it usually doesn't take any more than, I'd say, a week for them to be fully capable of foraging on their own, depending, of course, on the individual bird. So that about does it. I do highly recommend encouraging a bird to forage for their food, since it is a really great way to keep them active and entertained throughout the day, even if you're not there. Foraging is an excellent activity to give their brains something to focus on, which can prevent a lot of feather destructive behaviors, as well as preventing a bird from overeating and becoming overweight. Foraging is an easy way to get your bird chewing on their toys, keeping their beaks trimmed, and overall is just great for your bird's health. So I hope this video was helpful and gave you some things to consider. That's going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye! You say bye? Good bird. And it also keeps them entertained, which can